May 8, 1945. Berlin, the most destructive war in human history, is over. Nazi Germany has surrendered unconditionally. Adolf Hitler is dead. The Third Reich, the empire built to last 1,000 years, has lasted 12. Inside a shattered building in a city that looks like the surface of the moon, a single man steps forward to accept Germany's formal surrender on behalf of the Soviet Union. He is 48 years old, the son of a shoemaker, born in a mud-floor village with no running water, no formal education beyond age 13, no family connections, no military dynasty behind him, and he had just defeated the most powerful military machine the world had ever assembled. His name was Georgy Zhukov. He had saved Moscow when saving it seemed impossible. He had sprung a trap at Stalingrad that swallowed an entire German army whole. He had smashed the Wehrmacht's last offensive capability at Kursk and never looked back. He had driven one of the largest forces in history across a continent and into the burning heart of Berlin. By any honest military accounting, he was the greatest field commander of the Second World War. And within 1 year of this moment, the man he had bled for would begin erasing his name from history. This is the story of Georgy Zhukov, the general who won the war, and the system that could not forgive him for it. Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov was born on December 1, 1896, in Strelkovka, a village in Kaluga province, so small and so poor that most maps did not bother to mark it. His father was a shoemaker. His mother took in seasonal work. The floor of the house they lived in was dirt. At 13, he was sent to Moscow as an apprentice furrier. He worked long hours in cold workshops. He sent money home. Nothing about his life suggested what was coming. In 1915, the Imperial Russian Army conscripted him. World War I was consuming an entire generation of Russian men, and Zhukov was loaded onto a train heading toward the front at 19 years old, having never held a rifle. He proved to be extraordinarily good at war. He was twice decorated for bravery in the field. A grenade blast killed the men standing next to him and left him partially deaf for months. He did not break. When the Russian Revolution collapsed the old Imperial Army in 1917, Zhukov joined the Bolsheviks and fought through the savage Russian Civil War, rising steadily through the new Red Army on the only currency he had: pure ability. He was not charming, not political, not connected. He was simply better at commanding men in the field than almost anyone around him. In an army being rebuilt from ruins, that turned out to be enough. By the late 1930s, he was a senior commander. But to become the general history needed him to be, he first had to survive something more dangerous than any battlefield. He had to survive Stalin. Stalin's Great Purge of the late 1930s gutted the Red Army of its most experienced leadership. Roughly 35,000 officers were executed or imprisoned, including 3 of the 5 top marshals. The army that remained was a force of survivors, men who had learned that disagreeing with the wrong person was a death sentence. Zhukov navigated this by being indispensable. And in 1939, he got the chance to prove it. Japan's Kwantung Army had been pushing into Soviet-controlled territory at Khalkhin, a remote river on the Mongolian steppe. It was a forgotten conflict in a place most people had never heard of. Zhukov was sent east to solve it. What he did there was a preview of everything that followed. He assembled his forces in total secrecy, moving supplies only at night, disguising his troop concentrations behind a wall of radio silence and misdirection. Japanese commanders monitoring his positions had no idea an offensive was being prepared. Then Zhukov struck simultaneously from 3 directions, a perfectly executed encirclement that trapped and destroyed the Japanese 6th Army in 11 days. The same tactical blueprint he would use against Germany 4 years later. He had already worked it out in Mongolia against a different enemy in 1939. Stalin noticed. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, the largest military invasion in history, sending over 3 million soldiers across the Soviet border in a single day, the man Stalin needed was already there. Barbarossa hit the Soviet Union like a collapsing roof. Entire armies were encircled and destroyed in the first weeks. The losses were beyond any rational calculation. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners, thousands of tanks and aircraft gone within days. The road to Moscow lay open. By October 1941, German forces were less than 60 miles from the Soviet capital. Units inside Moscow's defensive perimeter were running out of ammunition. Officers had lost contact with their men. Civilians were flooding out of the city. Stalin himself briefly packed personal belongings to evacuate before deciding to stay. He gave Zhukov command of the Moscow defenses and told him to hold the city. What Zhukov found was a front on the edge of collapse. He did not panic. He had never panicked. That quality alone made him extraordinary among men facing what he was facing. He scraped together every reserve he could find. He pulled fresh Siberian divisions westward, soldiers trained and equipped for exactly the brutal winter conditions settling across the front. He constructed a defensive system designed not to hold the Germans in one position, but to bleed them across dozens simultaneously, grinding them down until the cold and the distance finished what bullets could not. On December 5th, 1941, with temperatures at minus 30 degrees and the Wehrmacht's forward momentum finally spent, Zhukov launched a counteroffensive. The Germans retreated from Moscow's gates for the first time. It was the first major German military defeat of the entire war. It shattered the myth of an unstoppable Wehrmacht, and it bought the Soviet Union the breathing space it needed to survive into 1942. Moscow held. Russia held. Zhukov had done it with what he had, which was almost nothing. By autumn 1942, the war had reached its defining crisis. Hitler had staked the German 6th Army, over 200,000 men under Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, on the capture of a single city, Stalingrad, a place on the Volga River whose name Stalin had made politically impossible to surrender. The battle inside the city was unlike anything the modern world had seen. Men fought for individual rooms, for single floors of burned-out buildings, sometimes hand-to-hand in rubble so dense there were no longer any recognizable streets. It was total annihilation at close range, sustained for months. While the Germans consumed themselves taking the city brick by brick, Zhukov was somewhere else entirely. He and his fellow commander Alexander Vasilevsky were standing over maps, looking not at Stalingrad, but at everything around it. They saw it clearly. The flanks of the German advance into Stalingrad were held by Romanian and Italian forces, Allied armies, but armies without the equipment, training, or motivation of the German corps. Long exposed flanks, thinly defended, stretching north and south of the city for hundreds of miles. They were not a defensive line. They were an invitation. Zhukov called the plan Operation Uranus. The concept was deceptively simple. Do not fight for Stalingrad. Go around it. Hit both flanks at once. Drive them inward. And close the ring behind the entire German force before it could withdraw. On November 19, 1942, 1 million Soviet soldiers attacked simultaneously from the north and the south. The Romanian lines collapsed within hours. Soviet armored columns raced toward each other across the open steppe. Within 4 days, the encirclement was complete. The German 6th Army, 200,000 men, was sealed inside a shrinking pocket with no exit and no relief coming. Hitler refused to allow retreat. He ordered Paulus to hold. He promised a rescue force that never arrived. On February 2nd, 1943, Paulus surrendered. 91,000 German soldiers walked into Soviet captivity. It was the single most catastrophic defeat Germany suffered in the entire war. From that moment forward, the Wehrmacht was retreating. Zhukov had not just won a battle. He had broken something inside the German war machine that never healed. If Stalingrad broke the Wehrmacht's spirit, Kursk destroyed its body. By the summer of 1943, Germany's military leadership understood that the strategic initiative had shifted. They planned one final massive offensive in the east, a pincer attack against a large Soviet salient near the city of Kursk. Codename: Operation Citadel. The goal was to cut off and destroy the Soviet forces inside the bulge, stabilize the front, and buy time. Zhukov read it coming months before it arrived. He presented Stalin with an analysis that was blunt and counterintuitive. Do not attack first. Let the Germans come. Build the deepest defensive system the Eastern Front had ever seen. Layer after layer of trenches, minefields, anti-tank guns, and artillery. And let the German offensive exhaust itself breaking through them. Then, when the German armored force was spent and battered, strike. Stalin, who instinctively preferred offense, took weeks to be convinced. Zhukov held his position. He was one of the very few men in the Soviet Union who could push back against Stalin and survive it. The defensive network built around Kursk became the most elaborate fortification system of the entire war. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers, 6,000 tanks, nearly 500,000 mines laid across a defensive belt 150 miles deep. Germany launched Operation Citadel on July 5, 1943. Their armored columns ran directly into what Zhukov had built for them. They could not punch through. They could not go around. They ground forward a few miles at enormous cost. And then, for the first time on the Eastern Front, a major German offensive stalled completely without achieving a breakthrough. On July 12th, near the town of Prokhorovka, the largest tank engagement in the history of warfare erupted across the steppe. Hundreds of Soviet and German tanks fought at close range in a battle so intense and so massive it had no precedent in military history. Germany lost. Not just the battle, the ability to launch any major strategic offensive in the East ever again. Zhukov had predicted it, designed the defense that produced it, and now he turned the full weight of the Soviet war machine westward. There would be no more retreating. What followed was an unstoppable advance. Operation Bagration, in the summer of 1944, annihilated German Army Group Center in 2 months, one of the most complete destructions of a major military force in modern warfare. By early 1945, Zhukov's forces stood at the Oder River, staring across at Germany itself. The final operation was Berlin. In April 1945, Zhukov commanded over 1 million Soviet soldiers, 20,000 artillery pieces, and 6,000 tanks in the assault on Hitler's capital. The battle lasted 2 weeks and cost the Soviet Union over 80,000 dead. He drove his forces without pause, racing his fellow commander Ivan Konev, who was approaching from the south, each determined to be the army that reached the Reichstag first. On April 30th, Hitler killed himself in his bunker beneath the city. On May 2nd, Berlin surrendered. On May 8th, Georgy Zhukov stepped forward in a shattered building in the city he had just taken and accepted Germany's unconditional surrender. The shoemaker's son from Strelkovka had ended the war in Europe. He flew home to Moscow. On June 24th, 1945, he rode a white horse through Red Square, while the crowd roared and captured German battle standards were thrown at his feet. He was the most celebrated soldier in the Soviet Union. Possibly the most celebrated soldier in the world. Stalin watched from the podium above, and the machinery was already in motion. Within a year, Zhukov was summoned before the Higher Military Council on charges that were absurd on their face: self-promotion, claiming excessive credit for Soviet victories, disrespecting colleagues. Fellow marshals who had served alongside him were pressured into providing testimony. The verdict was predetermined. He was stripped of his command and exiled to the Odessa military district, a provincial backwater posting for the man who had just accepted Germany's surrender. His name began disappearing from official war histories. Photographs of victory ceremonies were quietly altered to remove him. the Soviet propaganda machine that had celebrated him for 4 years began systematically erasing him. He suffered a heart attack in Odessa. He was then demoted further, sent to command the even more remote Ural military district. The KGB monitored his phone. His visitors were noted. His mail was read. Zhukov said of this period, "Stalin was jealous of my glory." It was not bitterness. It was a fact. Stalin died in 1953. Zhukov returned to prominence, became Minister of Defense by 1955, then was dismissed again by Khrushchev in 1957 for the same reason Stalin had exiled him. Too respected, too powerful, too dangerous to leave in place. He retired. He wrote his memoirs carefully, choosing every word in a country that had punished him twice for being too exceptional at his job. He died in Moscow on June 18, 1974. History does not resolve Georgy Zhukov cleanly. It never will. He was ruthless in ways that go beyond normal military command. His casualty figures were staggering. He sent men into positions he knew were unsurvivable when the strategic objective required it. He operated inside a Soviet system that executed officers for failures outside their control, and he navigated that system in part by being willing to accept its terms. He was not a hero in the comfortable sense of the word, but he was the man who stopped the Wehrmacht at Moscow when stopping it looked impossible. He was the architect of the trap that swallowed the German 6th Army at Stalingrad. He was the strategist who read Kursk correctly when everyone else wanted to attack, who built the defense that permanently ended Germany's ability to win in the East, and who then drove that same broken force all the way back to Berlin. The Eastern Front was the hinge of the entire Second World War. More soldiers fought and died there than on every other front combined. And no single person shaped that front more decisively than Georgy Zhukov. He was the greatest general of the war, and the country he saved spent a decade trying to make the world forget his name. That is his legacy. Brilliant beyond argument, brutal beyond comfort, betrayed by the very system he had given everything to preserve. The shoemaker's son who broke Hitler and was punished for it. Subscribe and leave a comment below. Was Zhukov the greatest general of the Second World War? Or does the human cost of his victories disqualify him? See you in the next one.